The Great Depression, which was from the 1920s and the 1930s, started out with kind of a roar. As we looked at in class, it started out with everyday life and just the opportunities people had to have electricity in their houses, to buy more things, especially things that you used electricity to run. They were able to go to department stores and buy things that they'd never been able to buy before without mailing in an order and having it mailed back to their house. Women were having new freedoms and opportunities to work outside the home. Mass production made things more affordable and available. Stores started offering credit, so even if you didn't have money for it, you could still get it and make payments. And the stock market was booming, so a lot of people were choosing to invest money in the stock market or borrow money to invest in the stock market, hoping to make even more money. There were some new opportunities specifically for minorities. African Americans would move north because there were more jobs up there, industrial jobs, and were treated slightly better than they were in the South. There was new arts and music, specifically for African Americans. One of the music that we talked about was jazz and Louis Armstrong. People also had just a little bit more freedom and free time, I should say, where they could go out and spend a little more time socializing, or they had a little extra money so they could go see a movie. People bought radios, and that was like the modern day technology. They didn't have TVs or anything like that, but that was the focus. However, at the same time, there was things that were not so great. There was definitely some intolerance that was happening, specifically towards immigrants and people who had quote unquote radical political beliefs such as communism. There was an Immigration Act of 1924 that specifically targeted Japanese people and making it illegal for them to immigrate into the United States. And then, as always, since slavery, African Americans were discriminated against and treated unequally. One of those groups was the Ku Klux Klan, as you can see in the image on the right. So there was a lot of really great things happening at the time, but then there were also some not so great things happening at this time. And the thing that started kind of the downward spiral of the economy of the United States was Black Tuesday, which was October 29th, 1929, when the stock market took a huge hit and just dropped. And when that happened, it started a chain reaction that made our economy dive deeper and deeper into the hole. Banks had decided to invest in the stock market, and so when the stock market crashed, the banks lost all that money, and the money they had been using, unfortunately, was not their own, and they actually lost people's money who had saved it at their bank. So that was a huge thing, bank failures, and they had to close. Businesses had been riding the high. Everything was going super well. They were making a lot. And so they were investing all of their money in making things because they knew it was going to sell. Well, when people stopped buying, businesses didn't have any money because they had spent it all producing. And so they started failing. Foreign countries could not pay the loans back to the United States that were owed to them. And when we tried to sell overseas, they were charging us a really high tax to sell in other countries, so people weren't making a lot of money. And these are the main causes of the Great Depression. So all of these things combined had that negative effect on our economy. As a result, people suffered. People lost their jobs, their homes, their life savings. They couldn't buy food. Families broke apart. Families had the hard decision to put their children in orphanages because they knew at least if they were in an orphanage, they'd get fed and wouldn't starve to death. People committed suicide, and many people were so thankful to keep a job that they were taking less pay than what they used to make for the exact same job. So these are effects that happened. One other big effect that happened was named after the current president, which was Herbert Hoover. He was not successful in immediately fixing things, and many people felt very angry at his leadership. And so when they became homeless and had to go live in homeless areas, they named him after Herbert Hoover, and they called them Hoovervilles. Remember, Hoovervilles were based basically homeless towns where people would go live on public property, and they'd build a shelter out of whatever they could find: scraps of wood, tin, tar paper, newspapers. There wasn't any running water, no bathrooms, which led to many unsanitary conditions. As far as heat goes, if they did have a heat source inside, it could be a fire hazard, really risky. So most of the ways that they would heat themselves were outside their home, and a lot of times it was like a burning barrel. So you'd have to go outside and stand around a barrel that had wood inside it to heat up. This is just another example of a Hooverville on the side of apartment building. While this is all happening, there is also something happening in the south part of the United States in the center called the Dust Bowl. And this is the image of the Dust Bowl that I showed you in class, which was 10 years of continuous dust storms, and the dust would be so thick and so widespread that it would block out the sun. This is the area where it was targeted the most: Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. So here we see it's in the center of the United States in the south. The dust did affect other areas, but these were the areas that had that severe drought as well. Ultimately, because the dust storms were so bad, it made it impossible to grow crops. So people lost their farms. Many people died, as well as their cattle died. It forced many to move away. And then anybody in that community, like banks and stores, had to close, because when there were no farmers there to buy stuff or to save their money in a bank, there was no reason for that bank or that store to be there. During this time period, along came FDR, which is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he introduced a bunch of new deals. So in class, we looked at 8 of the new deals, and they touch on different areas for different people. So this is kind of an overview of the 8 new deals that we talked about in class: the Federal Emergency Relief Act, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Works Progress Administration, the Social Security Act, the Tennessee Valley Authority, the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, the Soil Conservation Service, and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. So what we're going to do today in class, after you've completed this Edpuzzle, is I am going to give you a people group, and you are going to tell me which new deal would have benefited them the most and explain why. Some things we can say were a benefit of the new deals that was a little bit more generic are: it provided jobs, it put money in people's pockets, it made people feel like, oh, there was hope again, there was a chance for things to get better, and it also created a safety net for needy people. This is the first time where government would step in and help people out. For farmers specifically, it raised crops and cattle prices and helped them keep their farms. And this one we didn't talk about much in class, but this is really important to understand. The US government got bigger. It got bigger because all of these new deals involved hiring people to supervise and organize, and they needed to hire people within the government to do this. So the new deals caused the US government to get bigger and become more involved in people's lives. Now that you are done with the review, you're going to go to Schoology and you're going to upload this new deal people group document from today's folder in Schoology. And what you're going to do is I've identified a people group: farmers, elderly, people from poor areas, minorities, and people who needed immediate help. And what you're going to do is you're going to tell me the new deal that best helped this people group and why you think that. So you're going to tell me, out of the 8 new deals that we looked at, which one do you think helped the farmers the most and why? Which one helped the elderly and most and why? Which one helped poor areas the most and why? Minorities the most and why? And people who needed immediate help the most and why? So start by identifying the new deal and then give your evidence to support why that new deal was the best to help each one of these different people groups. When you are finished, please submit this people group into Schoology as your assignment for today.